Mylin collapsed onto the frozen bench, her small wooden box clutched against her chest like a shield. Inside were her father's remedies, her only inheritance. The train's whistle faded into the Wyoming night. Gone. The last train to San Francisco, and with it, her last hope of reaching a place where she might not be so alone. Her fingers were losing their feeling. She didn't know if that was mercy or cruelty. December 1887 had teeth. The wind off the mountains bit through her thin, padded jacket, a relic from a life across the ocean, now worthless against the frontier cold. Snow began to fall. Soft at first, then harder, a relentless white curtain. The station's single oil lamp flickered like a dying heartbeat. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. This was how it ended. Not in the arms of family, but on a forgotten platform in the middle of nowhere. Ticket stolen, the last of her husband's railroad pay gone. Pride was all she had left, and pride couldn't start a fire. Hoofbeats broke through the wind's howl. Mylin looked up through the swirling snow. A rider, tall in the saddle, his dark coat dusted white. He reined in his horse, a massive bay that snorted steam into the frozen air. The man dismounted, moving toward her with deliberate, heavy steps. Stations closed, Mylin said, hating how her voice, accented and small, shook in the vast emptiness. I can see that his voice was deep, careful. You waiting for someone? The train. It left. Last one went an hour ago. I know, she whispered. He stood there, studying her. She could barely make out his face in the lamplight. Weathered, maybe 35, with eyes that had seen things. Money was in the cut of his coat, in the fine leather of his saddle. I don't need pity, she said, her chin lifting. Good. I don't give any. He held out a gloved hand. But I won't leave you to freeze, either. Mylin looked at his hand, looked at the empty darkness behind him, then at her own hands, blue-tinged in the lamplight. She was a widow. A stranger. In this country, she was less than nothing. But she was also a survivor. She took his hand. He pulled her up with surprising gentleness, steadying her when she swayed. Up close, he smelled like leather and pine and something indefinable, safety, maybe. Though she had stopped believing in that. Harrison Thorne, he said. People call me Harrison. Mylin, she replied. He lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His coat came around her shoulders without his asking. As they rode into the dark mountains, Mylin looked back once. The empty station disappeared into the snow. Everything she'd been running toward had vanished, but the warmth at her back was real. She allowed herself to lean into it. Just this once. Mylin woke to firelight and the smell of coffee. For one confused moment, she thought she was back in her small home in Guangdong. Then she saw the bearskin rug, the rough-hewn ceiling beams, and remembered the imposing cowboy, the ride through darkness, the strong arms lifting her down. She sat up fast, too fast. The room tilted. Easy, his voice came from the doorway. Harrison. That was his name. He held a tin cup. You were half frozen. Another hour, Anne. He stopped. Coffee. Mylin took inventory. She was still fully dressed. Her worn boots were placed neatly beside the cot. Her precious medical box sat on a small table, untouched. It was a one-room cabin, dominated by a stone fireplace. A single window showed a pre-dawn grey sky. Where am I? Foreman's cabin on my ranch. Gus retired, but I kept it maintained. You're safe. Safe. That word again. She accepted the coffee, letting the heat seep into her palms. I will be gone by morning. It is morning. The next train west is in 3 days. 3 days. Mylin's chest tightened. 3 days of charity, of owing a debt to this stranger, of being the pitiful foreign woman. I will work for my room and board, she said, her voice firm. I am a healer. My father was a doctor. Your ranch hands, they get injured. I can help. Harrison leaned against the doorframe, a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. You don't have to. I am not a charity case, Mr. Thorne. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Just Harrison. And if you're offering, I won't refuse. This ranch is dangerous work. As if summoned, shouting erupted outside. Harrison moved fast. My Lynn, acting on instinct, grabbed her box and followed. The scene was chaos. 3 ranch hands struggled to hold down a 4th. Ricardo, someone yelled. Caught his arm on barbed wire. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping into the frozen mud. My Lynn didn't ask permission. She knelt, opened her box, and took control. Hold him still. Someone get me clean water and cloths. She pointed at Harrison, whiskey. For the wound. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She cut away the sleeve, assessed the damage, a deep, jagged laceration, but no arterial bleeding. She cleaned it with whiskey, ignoring Ricardo's hiss of pain. She prepared a poultice of herbs from her box, applying it to stem the bleeding, then sutured the wound with a fine, curved needle. 12 minutes, start to finish. Ricardo's breathing steadied. The other men stared, mouths agape. My Lynn stood, wiping her hands on her trousers. She met Harrison's eyes, her own gaze steady and challenging. 3 days, he said quietly. You work, you stay. No charity. No charity, she agreed. That evening, an old man arrived at the cabin. He had a grey beard, kind eyes, and weathered hands. Gus. He looked at My Lynn through the window, then at Harrison on the porch. Boss, the town's going to talk. A woman like that, a Chinese woman, staying out here alone with you. Harrison's voice was flat. They always find something to talk about, but his hand gripped the porch rail so tight his knuckles went white. Inside, My Lynn pretended not to hear. She'd heard it all before. The whispers, the stares, the venom. She wouldn't let it destroy her again. The buckboard creaked to a stop in front of Finch's General Store. My Lynn had forgotten what it felt like to be watched by dozens of eyes at once. No, she remembered. That's why she'd been running west. Redemption, Wyoming wasn't much. False front buildings, frozen mud streets, and mountains looming like judgments. But it had everything the last town had: people, gossip, and conclusions drawn before facts were known. Harrison helped her down. You need a proper coat. Boots, too. If you're staying, I can't afford to pay you wages, but I'll see you're outfitted. He was already inside before she could argue. The store smelled of dried goods, leather, and wood smoke. Mrs. Finch, the proprietor's wife, smiled too widely, her eyes calculating. Mr. Thorne, how lovely. And this must be your new help. My Lynn works for me, Harrison said evenly. She needs outfitting. He held up a heavy wool coat, deep blue and well-made. My Lynn touched it, then hesitated. Taking things felt like sinking deeper into a debt she could never repay. The bell over the door chimed. Mrs. Agatha Finch swept in like winter itself. She was in her 50s, wore an expensive dress, and had eyes as sharp as ice picks. The banker's wife, the town's self-appointed moral authority. Harrison Thorne, she said, her voice carrying across the silent store. How very generous of you to take in strays. Though one does wonder what sort of services she's providing in exchange for your charity. The store went silent. My Lynn's face burned with a familiar shame. Here it was. Different town, same cruelty. Harrison could stay silent. He could let it pass. He could. He stepped beside My Lynn. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a claiming gesture, public and deliberate. My Lynn is a gifted healer, he said, his voice a low growl. She saved my ranch hand's arm yesterday. My ranch is safer with her there. He turned to Mrs. Finch directly. Your husband's bank nearly foreclosed on the Johnsons last month over $50. Glass houses, Agatha. Mrs. Finch's face reddened, but she was too practiced for outright confrontation. Really, Harrison? People will talk. Let them. He paid for the coat and handed it to My Lin. I've got work to do. Outside, My Lin breathed hard. Snow began falling again. Always snow, endless and cold. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I'm leaving in 2 days anyway. Harrison loaded supplies into the wagon. There was a long pause, too long. What if you didn't? My Lin looked at him, really looked. She saw something in his eyes that terrified her, hope. The kind that got crushed. What are you saying? He didn't answer. The train station was visible in the distance, its platform empty and accusing. Neither of them moved toward it. One more week, My Lin heard herself say. Just to be sure Ricardo's arm heals properly. Harrison nodded once. One more week, but they both knew it was a lie. The kind you tell yourself before you let someone matter. 2 weeks became 3. My Lin told herself it was professional responsibility. Ricardo's wound healed clean, but there were others, a broken finger, a man kicked in the ribs by a horse, a fever that needed watching. She told herself it wasn't about the way Harrison looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. January froze the world solid. Harrison's prized mare was dying. He knew it the moment he walked into the barn and saw Stardust lying on her side, breathing in shallow, pained gasps. My Lin was already there, kneeling in the straw, her hands gentle on the horse's distended belly. A twisted intestine, she said without looking up. Without surgery, she'll be dead by morning. Harrison's face went stone. Stardust had been Eleanor's horse, his wedding gift to his late wife. 7 years ago. One of the last things he had left of her. Can you save her? I can try. But I've never operated on a horse. I need you to hold the lantern. Keep it steady. For 2 hours, Harrison watched My Lin's hands move, steady, confident, merciful. Blood and sweat and absolute focus. She worked like someone who had made peace with impossible choices. The mare lived. Dawn broke grey and cold. They sat outside the barn, exhausted, steam rising from their coffee mugs in the frozen air. Harrison spoke first. My wife, Eleanor, died 3 years ago. Consumption. The doctor didn't arrive in time. My Lin said nothing, waiting. I keep thinking, if I'd ridden harder to fetch him. If I'd known sooner? His voice cracked. I couldn't save her. You cannot carry that, My Lin said quietly. Can't I? She looked at him, her dark eyes holding a deep sorrow of their own. My husband, Lian, died helping build the railroad. A tunnel collapse. I was told it was his honor. It was right for the company. She paused. But right doesn't stop the loneliness. Right doesn't bring him back. I lost everything. You saved a life, he said, nodding toward the barn. So did you? Just now. You held the light steady for 2 hours. You saved Stardust because you trusted me. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then, My Lin, why did you really run west? Because I am tired of being punished for being who I am. He understood. She saw it in his eyes. Later, Gus found Harrison fixing the cabin window, adding a bookshelf, carrying extra firewood inside. You're courting her, Gus stated simply. I'm making repairs. Sure you are, Boss. Gus grinned. That woman's got a spine of steel and a heart she's afraid to use. Don't waste this. Harrison said nothing. But that night, My Lin watched from her window as he walked toward the main house. He stopped halfway, turned, and looked back at her lit window. He stood there for a full minute, then continued on. My Lin's hand touched the cold glass. The loneliness was worse now, because she knew what it felt like to almost not be lonely. The blizzard hit at dusk, turning the world white in minutes. Harrison had come to secure the cabin shutters and got caught. Now he stood by the door, snow-covered, looking trapped. "You can't leave," My Lin said. "Visibility is 0. You'll die before you reach the main house." "I shouldn't stay." She met his eyes. "Propriety can go to hell. I am not letting you freeze." They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. The wind howled like wolves. The cabin creaked and groaned. "I haven't visited Eleanor's grave in 6 months, Harrison said suddenly. "Feels like betrayal." My Lin poked the fire. "She would want you to live. That is not betrayal. That is honoring her love." "How do you know?" "Because I would want the same. If I loved someone, I would want them to survive me, to find joy again." Her voice softened. "You're allowed to heal, Harrison." "I don't know if I remember how." "Neither do I." The temperature dropped. The fire wasn't enough. My Lin made the decision. Survival dictated it, she told herself. Just survival. She moved beside him, wrapping them both in blankets. Harrison's arm came around her shoulders, hesitant and careful. Her head fit perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. They sat like that for an hour, then 2, not speaking, just breathing together. My Lin, she looked up. His eyes asked permission. Hers gave it. The kiss was gentle, tentative, 2 people afraid to break. When they pulled back, both were shaking, and not from the cold. "I don't know how to do this again," Harrison whispered. "Neither do I. So, we will figure it out together. Or fail together." "I'm not planning on failing." They slept wrapped in each other, the fire burning low, the storm raging outside. Morning came clear and brutal. Harrison prepared to leave. They hadn't spoken about the kiss. Words would make it real, and real things could be destroyed. At the door, My Lin said, "This cannot happen again. Not unless you are prepared for what the town will do." Harrison turned. "I'm prepared," but his hand trembled on the door handle. Outside, in the distance, a figure on horseback watched through the trees. Mrs. Finch's stable boy, delivering supplies after the storm. He'd seen Harrison leave the cabin, seen how long he'd stayed. The boy turned his horse toward town. The secret was out. My Lin stood at the front of Redemption Church. 20 pairs of eyes bored into her like nails. She'd been summoned. A town meeting urgent. When she arrived, they were waiting. Reverend Thompson's face was sympathetic, which was worse than contempt. Mrs. Finch stood front and center, righteous fury wrapped in silk. "We're concerned," the Reverend began. "For your welfare, My Lin, and for the moral character of our community." "Concerned," My Lin repeated flatly. "You've been living on Mr. Thorne's property for over a month," Mrs. Finch said. "An unwed foreign woman, alone with a man. People have seen." "What have they seen?" "Impropriety. A woman of your situation, taking advantage of a grief-stricken widower." "Taking advantage." My Lin's voice cut like a scalpel. "I have set bones, delivered babies in the camps, and saved lives, including your cattle hand, Mrs. Finch, when he had pneumonia." "What, exactly, am I taking?" "Your personal life is your concern," Reverend Thompson said gently, "but when it affects the community—" "My personal life is my own," My Lin interrupted. "I have harmed no one." The church doors opened. Marcus Thorne strode in, Harrison's younger brother, in a slick suit, with ambitious eyes. He'd been in Denver for weeks. His timing was suspiciously perfect. "My Lin," Marcus said smoothly. "I'm afraid this situation has become untenable. My brother's grief has clouded his judgment. For everyone's sake, you'll need to leave the Thorne property by week's end." My Lin's face went white. "Does Harrison know about this?" "I am the co-owner of the ranch. I have the authority." The doors opened again. "Harrison!" He took in the scene instantly, My Lin surrounded, Marcus playing judge, the whole town watching. His eyes met My Lin's. 1 second. 2. He hesitated. My Lin saw it. She saw him calculate the cost, his reputation, his brother's approval, the town's judgment. She saw him falter. That was all she needed. She walked toward the door, head held high, and past Harrison without looking at him. My Lin, don't. She disappeared into the winter afternoon. Harrison stood frozen. The church watched. Marcus smirked. You did the right thing. Brother Harrison didn't answer. He walked out, got on his horse, and rode to the cabin. It was empty. Her medical box was gone. The coat he'd bought her was folded neatly on the cot, left behind like a returned gift. Gus found him there an hour later, sitting in the dark. You hesitated, Gus said quietly. In that room, you hesitated. For the first time since Eleanor died, Harrison Thorne wept. My Lin's hands were raw from washing dishes in the saloon's kitchen. 2 weeks in redemption proper, living in a boarding house that smelled of mildew and broken dreams. The town kept its distance, polite enough, but cold. She was marked now. At least she was alone, as she was meant to be. The scream came from outside the saloon. My Lin ran. Lydia Finch, 16 years old, had collapsed on the boardwalk, clutching her side, her face grey with pain. Appendicitis. Get her inside. My Lin commanded. Mrs. Finch arrived in minutes, taking one look at her daughter, then at My Lin. What's wrong with her? Her appendix has burst. I need to operate now, or she dies. You're not a doctor. I am all you have. Choose. Mrs. Finch looked at her daughter's grey face and nodded once. My Lin operated on the saloon's kitchen table. Whiskey for anesthetic, a butcher knife she sterilized in boiling water. 2 saloon girls held lanterns steady. 30 agonizing minutes. The girl lived. Mrs. Finch sat with Lydia afterward, holding her hand. My Lin cleaned blood from her arms and packed her box. Thank you, Mrs. Finch said without looking at her. She needs rest. Watch for fever. My Lin walked out. No payment, no credit. Just the work. Just like always. At the Thorne Ranch, Harrison was falling apart. He didn't shave, barely ate. Marcus kept pushing. Sell the ranch. Start over. Forget the woman. Harrison rode to Eleanor's grave, drunk. I'm sorry, he told the headstone. Sorry I'm such a coward. You deserve better. My Lin deserved. His voice broke. I did it again. I failed again. Gus found him there. Your wife died, boss. That was tragedy. But you're alive, and you're choosing death anyway. That's just waste. What if I lose her, too? You already did, Gus said, his hand gripping Harrison's shoulder. But maybe she'd let you earn her back. Sunday morning. Harrison rode into town. Gus handed him My Lin's coat. Go get her. Snow began to fall. He pushed the church doors open mid him. Harrison Thorne walked down the center aisle like a man walking to his own hanging. Every head turned. The hymn died. In a back corner, My Lin looked up. Her heart leaped. Traitor! I need to say something. Harrison's voice filled the church. You can listen, or you can throw me out, but I'm saying it. No one moved. 2 weeks ago, I stood silent when this town judged My Lin. I hesitated when she needed courage. I was afraid. Afraid of gossip, afraid of being seen as foolish. He looked directly at My Lin. But if you want to judge someone's morality, judge mine. My Lin saved my horse when no one else could. She saved Lydia Finch last week, operating in a saloon kitchen without payment. She is the best person I know, and I was too much of a coward to say it when it mattered. He walked toward her. My Lin, I'm standing here in front of everyone who hurt you, and I am asking you, will you marry me? Not to make you respectable, but because I don't want to spend another day pretending I can live without you. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Mylin stood slowly, walked down the aisle. Every eye followed. She stopped in front of him. "You hesitated before." "I did," he said, his voice raw. "I won't again." "Not ever." "Then yes." The church erupted in gasps and whispers. Gus stood up. "I stand with them." Ricardo stood. "Me, too." One by one, the ranch hands stood. Then, slowly, reluctantly, Mrs. Finch nodded once, defeat, but also acceptance. Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose we could do this wedding right now, if you're both certain." Mylin laughed, the first genuine laugh in weeks. "Right now works." The Reverend married them on the spot. No flowers, no fancy dress, just two broken people choosing each other in front of everyone who tried to tear them apart. As Harrison kissed his bride, someone began clapping, then another, then the whole church, even Mrs. Finch, barely, begrudgingly. "This is insane," Mylin whispered. Harrison smiled. "Welcome to marriage." Outside, snow fell soft and clean. April came to Wyoming like a promise kept. The cabin, no longer a cabin, stood with new walls, new windows, a real porch. Wildflowers Mylin planted bloomed purple and gold around the foundation. Inside, the smell of medicinal herbs mixed with fresh bread. This was what home smelled like. Mylin ran a small clinic from the added room. Everyone was welcome. The town called her Dr. Thorne now, and she didn't correct them. Marcus had left for Denver, never reconciled. Gus lived in the main house, helping Harrison run the prospering ranch. Mrs. Finch visited one afternoon. Stiff, but genuine. She brought preserves. "Thank you for saving Lydia." "I should have said it then." Mylin nodded. "You're saying it now." "That's enough." That evening, Mylin stood on the porch, a hand on her pregnant belly. 6 months along, the baby kicked, strong and insistent. Harrison came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. They looked out over the land, the fields gone green, the mountains purple in the distance. "I spent so long running from judgment," Mylin said. "I forgot to build toward anything. And now I'm building everything." The blue wool coat hung by the door, waiting for the child who'd wear it someday. I hammer down hope. The sun set, gold over the Wyoming frontier. Somewhere in town, the train whistle blew, the same train that had left her behind 6 months ago. But she didn't turn her head. She was already where she belonged. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thorne," Harrison whispered. Mylin's hand rested on her belly, feeling new life move beneath her palm. She looked at the wildflowers, beauty growing from hard ground. Roots deep, blooming despite the winter that came before. "I've been home for a while now." The mountains turned purple with twilight. Somewhere, a night bird called. The land breathed, alive and healing. And in a small house on the frontier, two people who had survived their separate darknesses stood together, watching their future bloom.